After 30 years, I discovered he had a secret son, but I remained silent until the family gathering. I believed that after 30 years of marriage, I had kept our family together until the day I learned that my husband had a 31-year-old secret son. I kept quiet, collected the evidence discreetly, and waited at the family gathering, exposing everything they had spent decades putting on a show. It only took 1 minute to bring the entire performance to a head. My name is Margaret Brooks, and today is my 60th birthday. It also happens to be my grandson Mason's first day of 3rd grade. After my husband, Harold, and my daughter-in-law, Melissa, returned from work, the whole family gathered around the dining table. Melissa grinned as she glanced over the spread and turned to Mason. "You'd better thank Grandma," she said cheerfully, adding that she had prepared everything for your back-to-school celebration. That evening, Mason came home from school, and my son Brian brought back a cake. I had spent the entire afternoon in the kitchen preparing a large family dinner, roasting chicken, mashed potatoes, baked mac and cheese, and fresh garden salad. Every dish was something they all enjoyed. Harold's remark hurt a little, but seeing the smile on Brian's face made it easier to take the edge off my chest. I joined him in opening the cake box, but as soon as the lid came off, I froze at the cake that read "Congratulations. You cooked all this and didn't even think to get some wine," he said, scowling. "Let's not start tonight, okay?" he said, setting the cake in the middle of the table and tearing off the packaging. I had hoped that Brian would remember this year, and I had even reminded him a few days prior that my birthday coincided with Mason's school milestone. I told him that I was hoping for a proper celebration this time to feel seen and remembered, but here we were again, with no balloons, candles with my name, or even a hint of a birthday message outside of those few words. I swallowed the pain in my chest and forced a smile and said, "Aside from Mason's big day, do you remember what else today is?" Brian noticed my pause and called out, "What are you doing? Where's the lighter? Help me find it so Mason can make a wish." Harold barked from the other end of the table, "Did you go deaf? He asked you to grab the lighter. What are you standing there for?" He furrowed his brow, confused. "What do you mean, Mom?" I looked at Mason and said, "Get the damn lighter." Nothing more. There was no point in making this a scene away from the children. I went into the kitchen, got the lighter, and gave it to Brian, watching him light the candles. Everyone else at the table was laughing and celebrating, except for me. Dinner had just begun when Mason's fork fell off the table, and Melissa turned to me right away, but Harold and Brian were still deep in conversation, totally unaware. Mason twisted around in his seat and yelled, "Grandma, I dropped my fork. Go get me another one." For the first time I got up and remained seated, saying to Mason, "You can do that yourself." Mason scowled and kicked at his mother's chair, so Melissa tried to calm him down gently. Then, she turned to me and smiled sweetly, saying, "Margaret, where do you keep the extra silverware? I'll grab one for him." Harold gave me a glare, and as soon as she said, "Go get him a fork," Brian reached out to stop Melissa, casually dismissing it. "Take care of it, you don't have to." I got up, but instead of going to the kitchen, I went straight to my bedroom and started packing my things and gathering my bank statements. The money in those statements came from the food stall I ran for years. Harold didn't contribute much to this family, his pay was small to start, and what he made mostly vanished at poker nights with his friends. After Brian was born, I quit working because there was no one to help with child care, so I became a full-time mom, but Harold always complained that I spent too much money, as if every dollar I spent was a burden to him. After hearing this too many times, I stopped asking him for money altogether and instead set up a small food stall at the local farmer's market. I was good with my hands and even better with people, and the stall did surprisingly well over time. I started to consider leaving him at that point, but I decided against it because I was worried that Brian would grow up in a broken home, and I didn't want him to suffer because of us. I continued to put others before myself. I was the obedient child growing up, and my upbringing taught me that divorce was shameful because it would damage a woman's reputation, harm the family, and, most importantly, scar the children. As a result, I put up with Harold's drunken tantrums and my mother-in-law's constant criticism. I told myself that I had to stay for Brian in order to give him a whole family, and I did so for 30 years, but how many? Harold was downing a glass of whiskey in one gulp. The bottle was new, Brian had just gone out to buy it from the liquor store, and Melissa must have gone to the kitchen and gotten it for him the moment I walked in. Melissa gave me a cold, dismissive look, then lowered her eyes and continued eating as if I hadn't even been there. I wiped the tears from the corners of my eyes, grabbed my suitcase, and walked back into the living room, still resonating with laughter as if nothing had happened. Watching that scene made my heart sink even more. I've always detested alcohol. Because when Harold drinks, he turns into a loud, violent, reckless person who smashes things, yells at people, and sometimes even goes silent for days. Every time it happens, I'm left to pick up the pieces of everything I've saved and scrawled over the years to furnish this house, the furniture, the appliances, the small comforts I worked so hard for, one drunken rampage at a time. Every broken item was a kick in the gut, but Brian is aware of what happens to his father when he is intoxicated. He has witnessed it. Therefore, why does he continue to buy him alcohol? Perhaps he has forgotten what it's like to live with a drunk since he moved into the large 3-bedroom home I bought him in that lovely suburban neighborhood, or perhaps he never truly understood it because he was never the one left to clean up the mess, or perhaps he is simply a coward too scared of Harold's rage to confront him, so he plays along and lets me be the scapegoat I supported. Harold exploded first, slamming his glass down and appearing to be about to flip the entire table, but after a quick glance at Melissa and Mason, he forced himself to stop, even though his voice roared through the room as he said, "Have you lost your mind? You're nearly 70, and you want a divorce." Their dining table eyes were locked on Harold, and I said, "I want a divorce." My voice was steady, and I've had enough of this life. I'm still the most disposable person in this house, so this is what it's come to. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight, I said calmly, and tomorrow morning you're coming with me to sign the divorce. Now Brian jumped up too. Mom. What are you talking about? We're all just trying to enjoy dinner here, so why ruin everything? Melissa clutched Mason, her expression unreadable as she watched the scene unfold like it was just entertainment. I let out a quiet laugh that was cold and hollow. Harold's face twisted with anger. I'm not agreeing to this. Are you insane? You want to tear this family apart. Aren't you ashamed of what people will say? Brian immediately chimed in, Dad's right. Come on, Mom, you're both too old for this. What would people think if you split up? Harold saw Brian take his side. Condescendingly, poured himself another drink, and knocked it back like a king on his throne. His smug, dismissive expression made my chest tighten with rage, and I nearly lost control. Brian must have noticed the rage in my eyes and rushed to step in. Mom, you're not really doing this just because Dad had a few drinks tonight, are you? Look, I'll stay here tonight and keep an eye on him if he acts out, and I'll handle it. Let's just finish dinner, alright? Anything that's bothering you, I'll fix it, Brian said, but don't bring up divorce again. That's all my son has ever offered in the form of hollow promises. Since he got married, I've grown accustomed to being forgotten, but today I'm done pretending it doesn't hurt, done trying to please everyone, and done sacrificing myself for a family that never saw me at 60. I gave him a faintly bitter smile, and he asked me if he even remembered my birthday. He froze, his lips parted. But no words came out. Melissa abruptly moved in front of me, pulling Mason with her like a human shield. Come on, Margaret, she said gently, her voice as polished and soft as ever, a pleasant smile still pinned to her lips. We're family, every family has its little rough patches. Why don't we just sit down and talk things out? Melissa leaned in. Nothing but a terminal diagnosis giving me 6 months to live. I finally understand if I don't live for myself now, when will I ever? Her voice faded to a whisper near my ear. Didn't we agree not to discuss divorce again? I immediately moved away, putting distance between us. Well, I've changed my mind. I don't want any of you to get in touch with me again after I divorce Harold. I meant it. I wasn't just leaving Harold, I was severing all of our connections. What do you mean, none of us? Brian's voice rang out as he leaped up and hurried over to block the doorway. Mom. What the hell is going on? Actually, you changed your mind about what it sounds like. I said calmly, if you're having trouble understanding, perhaps your wife can explain it to you now. Step aside, I'm leaving. I pushed the suitcase forward, telling Margaret that she couldn't just leave. Melissa then grabbed me and clutched my arm as tears started to fall down her cheeks in a perfectly timed performance. What about Mason? Who will take care of him? Now? Are you really comfortable with him eating quickly? What if he gets sick? Don't you care? He's your grandson, the one you raised, your precious little boy. Can you really leave him? Her words were well chosen and delivered with the ideal balance of emotion and manipulation, but to me, it was all so ridiculous that I couldn't help but laugh icily when I saw that Melissa seemed to think she had struck a chord. She continued to speak in a sweet and enticing manner, saying things like, you care about him, don't you, Margaret? Do if it weren't for you taking care of Mason, keeping the house tidy, and managing everything behind the scenes. Let's face it, Brian isn't exactly a natural homemaker. She smiled at Brian and then leaned in to whisper to him, you know, every time my mom comes to visit, she always praises Brian for being such a responsible husband. She tells me, I married the right man. She laughed quietly, but she doesn't realize that it's all you're responsible for keeping everything together. You've earned Brian a good reputation, and I know that must feel good when people say that. Deep down, they're really praising you, and in addition, you've said enough. I cut her off with a sharp, icy voice. Melissa froze in shock, as if she was seeing someone else for the first time. What are you staring at? I snapped. I've never been angry before. What do you mean? What about Mason? Isn't he your son? Isn't it your duty to raise him? You can't live without me. You're both in your 30s, and you're not weaned yet. I've watched you put on this flawless daughter-in-law act for years. Aren't you tired? I'm starting today, and I'm done. I'm no one's mother, no one's grandmother, and definitely no one's wife from now on. When she didn't let go, I shoved her away. Mason saw me shove his mom, and he immediately rushed forward to give me a hard shove in return. Grandma, how dare you touch my mom? Do it again, and see what happens, Brian hurried in to shield Melissa, then turned on me, his voice trembling with anger. Mom, you've crossed the line, you need to apologize to my wife. Harold also got up to join the outcry, and the three of them closed in, screaming, accusing, and crying as chaos erupted in the room like an explosion. Despite this, I hadn't anticipated how deeply it would hurt and how quickly love could turn into blame and judgment. Brought tears to my eyes because these were the people I had spent my entire life caring for. All I wanted was a course, and all I wanted was to live for myself once. Why did that have to be so difficult? If you won't let me leave in peace, then okay, let's see how well you all perform when every ugly secret is brought to light. Okay, everyone, please calm down. I'll apologize. I turned to Melissa and made a small, courteous bow. I'm sorry, Melissa. I apologize for my behavior here. She froze, obviously confused by my abrupt change, but she quickly recovered and gave me a tearful smile. It's okay, I'm not upset, she said, looking at Brian and Mason. What do you think? Was my apology good enough? Do I deserve forgiveness? Mason nodded slightly, but Brian looked awkward. Mom. There's no need to be so formal, it's just an apology. I nodded a little. So would you agree that when someone does something wrong, they should apologize? Mason nodded again, and Brian paused for a moment, looking at Melissa as if he was looking for a cue, before nodding. Yeah, of course if you do something wrong, you should apologize well. I laughed icily, and that was all I needed to hear. I picked up my suitcase and pushed it against the door, then turned and walked back into the living room with composure. Dragged a chair over and took a seat in the middle of the chaos. When I said, coolly, let's talk about your father, Brian scowled, and Melissa's expression changed to one of instant anxiety and guardedness. You know, I said, cutting straight to the point, your father has another family. Harold leaped up from his seat and grabbed my arm in a panic. His voice was loud, angry, and shaking. Harold's face turned red as Brian stepped between us and unexpectedly took my side. I asked Melissa, who was with me when I found out you wanted to be a bystander, but she was with me tonight, and I yanked my arm free and stepped back. Am I making this up? What the hell are you talking about? Are you insane saying this in front of the kids? Dad let her finish. All eyes turned to Melissa, so I asked, tell them, am I lying? Silence fell over the room for the first time all night. Melissa stared at the floor, and finally, after what seemed like hours, she mumbled something that was barely audible. I'm not sure if Margaret was upset and said something she didn't mean, but Harold exhaled in relief. Of course, I hadn't expected her to be honest, but I still laughed dryly and bitterly and continued. Her name is White and lives at 113B Lincoln Street, apartment 302, which is your father's other residence. If you don't believe me, knock on the door yourself. I paused, then said casually, oh, and be polite. When you do, the person who answers the door might be your brother, who is 31 years old and only a year older than you. He's married and has a young daughter, so in addition to Mason, your father also has a granddaughter. That last line struck Harold's face like a grenade. None of this would have happened without Joan Carter, my so-called best friend, who first discovered Harold with another woman. She followed them covertly, conducted her own small investigation, and within a few days sent me a tidy little file full of pictures, the woman's background, and even the precise address of their home. Cheat White Melissa's panic was impossible to conceal. They never thought I'd know this much, not only the affair, the address, the age, and even the child, and they most definitely didn't expect me to destroy their idyllic little stage in one blow. Little love nest, but Joan didn't realize that I had already seen it with my own eyes the day before she sent me that file. That afternoon, I was at the grocery store pushing a cart full of household necessities. I was hot, sweaty, and aching from hauling everything around, waiting for my turn at the checkout line, when I saw Harold. He wasn't 20 feet away, walking with a woman my age who had several big shopping bags in tow, and he was trailing her like a devoted husband. She had silver gray hair. She was sleek and well-groomed, her skin was smooth and obviously well-maintained. She wore beautiful clothes and walked with grace, everything about her shouted comfort, luxury, and a stress-free life. In her other hand, she held the hand of a young girl, who was probably Mason's age, and she bounced happily ahead of them, laughing and looking back. Then, Grandma, she called out sweetly to the woman, and she turned to Harold, beaming and giving Grandpa a warm and happy family photo. The man who hardly spoke to me at home and treated our family like a duty was now playing the roles of the devoted husband, the loving father, and the loving grandfather, and for what? My hands went numb, and I stood frozen in place, staring at my husband as he basked in domestic bliss with another family. I was sweating through my shirt, dragging a heavy cart, and my fingers were swollen and sore from carrying everything on my own. Fell out of my hands and clattered to the ground, leaving apples and oranges all over the place. I snapped and charged at him, my blood boiling with rage. "Harold," I roared, grabbing him by the collar. He appeared to have seen a ghost, completely pale and stunned, speechless, and his new little family froze in place. The girl shrank behind the woman, who was obviously afraid, and she clutched Harold's arm, trying to pull him away, but I wasn't letting him go. I gave him a hard shove and yelled, "What have you been doing for all these years? Where the hell has our money gone? You owe me an answer." People stopped and stared, shoppers paused their carts, and some even began recording on their phones. I didn't care anymore, and I bit my tongue and swallowed my pride, telling myself to keep the peace for what was to be. Replaced like a worn-out appliance to watch him live the life he denied me. I wasn't going to remain silent any longer. I was going to make sure the truth came out, regardless of who saw it. By some cruel twist of fate, Melissa arrived home from work and saw the whole scene playing out. She hurried over to try to pull me away and calm me down, but it was too late. The curtain had already fallen, there was no turning back the truth, and no one could pretend anymore that night. Sitting in the living room, I finally discovered the whole truth. Brian Harold had already begun seeing that woman the year I was pregnant. It turned out that every time he disappeared for a few days after drinking, he wasn't out entertaining clients as he claimed but rather returning home. It also turned out that the majority of the money he had earned over the years didn't go into this household at all but rather went toward creating a life with them. As I listened to revelation after revelation, each one felt more ridiculous than the last, but the most ridiculous aspect that the woman was aware of me from the start and knew that Harold and I were dating. She also knew that we were planning to get married, but she didn't care. To make matters worse, during our conversation, she tried to give me advice, telling me not to worry because she was worried about our family and that she didn't want Harold, at his age, to become a lonely old man in a broken home. Then, with a straight face, she told me that she was okay with me remaining in the background and that she didn't mind if I continued to be his second family as long as she could continue to be his second family. I stared at her as her lips continued to move, thinking, how delusional do you have to be to think you have the right to lecture me? I turned to Harold and said, calm and cool, let's get a divorce, but before he could react, Melissa stepped in again, acting as a mediator. Margaret, take a breath and consider Brian. If this gets out, if people find out you're divorcing over something like this, what will happen? Will the neighbor say? Alm was almost laughing aloud. Of course, they care more about appearances than about me, and I should have known better than to think my son and his wife were ever going to stand on my side. I said in a quiet voice, I know exactly what you mean, but eventually, someone has to decide whether they want to live without dignity. Melissa persisted, just act like it never happened. Men make mistakes, that's just the way they are. Harold and you can maintain appearances for Brian's sake. I thought I could hold it all in one last sacrifice, one last compromise, but then my body started to falter, and I went to the hospital alone, feeling a strange discomfort I couldn't ignore. After giving it some thought and listening to her endless persuasion, I swallowed my disgust and made an agreement with Harold that we would remain married in name only, no more pretending in private just for the sake of the kids, but in reality, our marriage had died long ago. I'm done shrinking myself to make others comfortable, I'm done swallowing poison and calling it peace, and I'm done letting go of Brian. Calmly, I said, let's go see for ourselves and see if I'm truly sick. Why should I be the one to pay for his sins? Why should I keep breaking myself to protect the fragile pride of a family that never saw me? To hell with silence, to hell with sacrifice, to hell with pretending everything's fine. They had only moved in earlier this year, according to the documents Joanne had given me, and the house was newly purchased with money Harold had scraped together by secretly selling off his late parents' old house and several plots of land from his hometown. Melissa hesitated for a moment before finally pulling Mason along and following us. I was just making this up, but as soon as I finished speaking, Brian grabbed Harold by the arm and stormed out the door. I followed them slowly and steadily, my suitcase wheels clicking softly on the pavement behind me. Everything I had said was confirmed when we arrived at the house, and that's when Brian lost it. His emotions erupted like a volcano, releasing years of repressed pain, confusion, and bitterness. He turned to Harold and began yelling, his voice shaking with rage, and he wasn't just upset about today, he was also bleeding from every wound Harold had ever left on him. He recalled childhood memories one after another, such as the time in elementary school when he reached for a piece of roast chicken at the dinner table and was yelled at by the moment in middle school when he didn't have enough for lunch and dared to ask Harold for help, or the time in his most confused and agonizing adolescence when he finally found the courage to ask his father about life and purpose and was waved off with the words, "Talk to your mom, I don't have time for your nonsense," is one example of a drunken Harold saying, "Go ask your mother." His voice cracked with emotion, and tears welled in his eyes as he yelled, "All this time I thought maybe Mom and I just weren't good enough, that perhaps if we worked harder, you would love us in the end, but I know that you never intended to love us because you gave everything you had, your time, money, and heart, to someone else." Then, with all of that rage still burning in him, Brian tried to attack the woman, and Harold acted instinctively to protect her. The two of them, father and son, started fighting right there on the front lawn, and the neighbors came out. Someone must have called the police because minutes later, sirens pulled up, and 2 officers intervened to break up the altercation, escorting Harold and Brian into the back of a squad car. Just before they closed the door, Brian turned to me, his face twisted with anger and tears, and yelled, "You're so selfish, Mom. You blew this whole thing up just because you wanted a divorce. I know Dad wasn't great, but you two were together for decades. Couldn't you just keep it together a little longer? You had to burn everything down. For what? Are you happy now?" Harold, who was growling through gritted teeth from the other side of the car, said, "Goddamn circus, are you proud of yourself? You got what you wanted, didn't you? You had to ruin everything I had under control. Everything was fine until you tore down the curtain. You think that exposing me changes anything? What the hell do you gain from this?" Melissa interrupted, her voice cold and sharp. "Margaret, I told you not to drag this out. You had to go and make it public now. We could have worked something out and gotten some of it back with those properties he sold, but now it's all gone." She looked around bitterly, and she saw that the land is being redeveloped next year, and a resort is going in. The payout was going to be huge, but because of your little drama, we won't see a dime of it. What the hell were you trying to prove? They each took turns blaming me from their own perspectives for their own reasons, but for some reason, I felt completely at ease, and then Mason stood off to the side. Abruptly yelled, but it was Grandpa who had messed up. Why was everyone shouting? At Grandma? Didn't you say that if someone does something wrong, they should apologize? My heart clenched for a second, but Melissa quickly pulled him into her arms, bent down, and whispered something in his ear. When Mason looked up again, his eyes had changed to something cold and unfamiliar, and I realized. I didn't say anything more, so I turned away from that house and left, picked up my already packed suitcase, and left without even looking back. After that day, I severed my ties with my so-called family for good. The first few nights I woke up were filled with a racing heart from old habits and restless dreams, but eventually I found peace because this was exactly what I wanted to do with my life and finally live for myself. The pain wasn't nearly as terrible as I had once feared, and I splashed cold water in my face. I used a towel to dry it and then looked into the mirror, which showed wrinkled skin, silver hair, and tired eyes. I smiled at my reflection, and then I picked up my phone and called Joanne to ask if she still planned to go on the trip she had mentioned this month. Joanne has been my best friend for years. We used to run stalls at the local market together. Back then, she had recently lost her husband, and I was living as if I had no one. We relied on one another to get through everything, manage life, and support one another when no one else did. When Jason's business took off, he hired a housekeeper to help out around the house, and Joan finally began to enjoy life. She had invited me to travel and explore the world numerous times, but I always kept saying that I was too busy with family. Now that I had some free time, she was overjoyed when I called, and she laughed. I told her that I'm divorced and that I thought it was time to get out and clear my head. She asked where I was staying, so I gave her the name of the hotel I checked into, and I'll be there. Before I could protest, Joanne insisted that I not overthink things. Emily saw how uncomfortable I looked and smiled gently, saying, "You've done so much for us when our daughter was little, you were always there to help. This is just us returning the kindness," Jason added earnestly. Soon after, she said, "Wait. For me." What I didn't anticipate was that she wouldn't come alone. He brought Jason and his wife, Emily, with him. My fingers lightly touched the pearl necklace around my neck, which was Jason's birthday present to me this year. In fact, he had never missed a single birthday since he began. "Please consider me your son. If it weren't for you helping us when we were struggling, my mom and I might have ended up on the streets." Their words made my throat tighten. The truth was that they were giving me far too much credit. All I'd ever done was help Joanne when she was sick a few times and lend them a little money when they needed it. I used to be reluctant to accept anything, but he would always say it was from all of us, a small thank you. So I started returning the gesture gifts for Joanne, a small token here and there, which made me feel better, like I was keeping the balance. But how do you repay kindness like theirs? How do you ever repay love that deep? All I ever offered was a small trinket he brought me every year, at first simple but thoughtful, then jewelry, clothing, and even small surprises that made me feel seen. Helping hand, but they gave me back something much more valuable. June simply laughed and said, "That's what family does, you don't need a reason to care." Later, she asked Jason to arrange for us to go on a 15-day trip, and she was right. When your heart is heavy, a change of scenery really helps. Every day that went by, I felt lighter, my body felt stronger, and my mind was clearer. When we got back, I found a small apartment and signed a lease because I knew I didn't want to die in someone else's house. I didn't tell Joanne about this. Regarding the cancer, I simply stated that I needed some alone time. They didn't try to stop me, but they did make me promise to call them if I ever needed anything. After that, I started doing all the things I had always wanted to do but had never dared to try. I started by enrolling in a dance class. I had always loved dancing as a child, but we couldn't afford lessons at the time, so this time I chose something bold, hip-hop, and the class was full of 20-somethings, just to bring joy to the child in me that used to dance barefoot in the kitchen dreaming that I didn't care what the young people thought. People assumed that I didn't care if they made fun of my awkward appearance behind my back. I only cared about how I felt because this time, I was living for myself. I practiced daily, repeating every move, beat, and step. I knew that I would improve, and even if time ran out, I would dance one flawless routine for myself, like my life was messy, imperfect, and painful, but still mine, and this time, I would be the one to write the last chapter as long as two didn't give up on myself because as long as I danced honestly and joyfully, my life wouldn't have been in vain. Slowly, the rhythm got easier, my body got lighter, and my moves got sharper. The same kids who used to laugh at me now call me the cool lady. 6 months went by in the blink of an eye, and that morning I got up early and went to a small downtown photography studio to have my last portrait taken. I then went to a funeral home and made all the arrangements for my own death, choosing a burial because I wanted my ashes to drift with the currents to travel freely across the oceans to places I never had the opportunity to see, even if only in my spirit. I would travel through cities and landscapes I had never seen in my life, floating through places I had once dreamed of. When I got back to my dance class, I asked my instructor if she would do me a favor and record a full dance performance. She readily agreed, telling me that she had an online account where she uploaded videos and a platform where, as long as I wanted to leave a trace of my existence, a flicker of movement, a moment of joy that told the world I was here. The doctor said I had 6 months left, and after the divorce, I had done everything I ever wanted to do. I honestly believed I was ready for death, had no regrets, and had made peace with the end, but death didn't come one day. She even helped me set up a social media profile, and thanks to her guidance, I uploaded the video myself. After a day, 10, 30, and 2 months went by and I was still alive. The funeral home started calling me frequently to see how I was doing. At first, their tone was kind and understanding, like you would speak to someone whose time was running out. Then, their voices gradually became impatient and awkward, and eventually, they didn't even try to hide their amusement. "Ma'am." One of them even laughed during a call, sounding quite spry over there. 3 months after the doctor's predicted death date, something unexpected happened. I went viral in our town's senior community, and it all started with that dance video I uploaded. I thought it would just be a quiet keepsake, a final memento for myself, but I didn't know the platform would actually promote the video to other users. I didn't bother hiding my annoyance and snapped back a few words, and the man just laughed with that kind of energy. I said, "You've got a long road ahead," and he hung up. Evidently, it did. People liked it and watched it, and before I knew it, my little clip had become a local hit. Out of nowhere, people began to recognize me on the street, at the pharmacy, the bank, and the supermarket. Everywhere I went, someone would gasp and ask, "Hey, isn't that the grandma who does hip-hop?" They would then swarm me with compliments about how young I looked, how smooth my moves were, and how even the younger people weren't half as energetic. After one such encounter, I was still buzzing with their admiration, so I got a phone. I looked at the screen and saw the names of a son and grandson who hadn't bothered to contact me in months. I gave a slight smile and said, "Oh, so you and Brian patched things up." Harold laughed, and Melissa thought we should all sit down and talk things out. I let out a soft hum. "Well, that's wonderful, I wish you all the happiness." It was Harold. "Hey," he said casually, "when are you coming home? Brian wanted to take you out to dinner. Mason has been saying he misses you in the world," and I immediately hung up after texting him, telling him not to get in touch with me again unless it was about a divorce. However, it seemed like the man had gone crazy because the following day, he began sending me messages all the time, including Rose's sweet nothings and flirtatious little quotes, to which I didn't respond. A few days later, he called me again. His tone was syrupy and overly polite, asking how I was doing. Then, in the middle of our conversation, he abruptly said, "Hey, it sounds like you're doing pretty." Well, that was all I needed to hear. I didn't even dignify it with a response, I just hung up. Later that afternoon, Joan called me out of the blue and said, "We need to meet in person." I met her at a local cafe, and she was already seated when I arrived. Her expression was serious. As soon as I sat down, she slid her phone across the table and said, "Margaret," grimly, "you need to see this." It turns out Harold's so-called true love that Joan hit play, her jaw clenched, and she scrolled down to the comment section, which was worth more than I could have imagined. The woman, Denise, had posted a video online publicly disparaging me, portraying me as a cold-hearted old hag who said I was cruel and selfish, saying I would leave my husband and grandson to go gallivanting around like a teenager who didn't care if anyone lived or died. The few people who attempted to defend me were immediately overwhelmed by hate. One comment read, "I hope your mom turns out just like her." Overflowing with filth, the poor man is stuck with a woman like her, an old witch trying to act young. With no shame at all. The deeper we scrolled, the uglier it got. Joanne's hands trembled with rage as she handed me back my phone. "These people don't know a damn thing about you." I quickly opened my own dance video and visited the comment section. At the bottom, as I scrolled up, I saw that the same hate had spread over those who had clicked on the link from Denise's smear campaign. Now, using my post to spew their venom, I snapped my hands shaking with fury, saying, "I'm going to press charges because she's the real homewrecker." I got up so quickly that my chair almost toppled, and Joanne said firmly, "I'm coming with you." Just as we were about to leave, Harold, my phone rang again. Sighing, I picked it up and prepared myself for another round of pitiful growling, but this time it was Denise, not him. The gentle, thoughtful tone of the other woman had vanished, and her voice had become sharp and shrill. "Hey, old hag, what's going on between you and Harold?" she snapped. "HEK has been sending you flowers and sweet messages. What the hell are you two talking about? You think you can win him back?" Her voice was grated like a rusty blade as he said, I finally realized that this wasn't about justice or love. Rather, it was jealousy and insecurity. She wasn't lashing out because she cared, rather, she was afraid. 1. He loves that you're just a leftover inconvenience, a prop to keep his son from cutting him off, so tell me, what is your relationship with him? Now say something. She didn't even stop to breathe, just kept making accusations, a torrent of paranoid, venomous spite. Suddenly, I laughed. "This is your true face." I thought the real woman behind the performance was a shameless, self-absorbed, petty person, and just before I hung up, I leaned into the speaker and yelled as loudly as I could to tell that old bastard to go to hell. I was afraid that I might still have some control over Harold, that I might still have power she didn't, and that's what really made her pathetic. You two deserved each other. 2 more months went by, and suddenly Harold, who hadn't spoken to me in days, called and said he wanted to proceed with the formal divorce paperwork. I laughed quietly and said, "I'm not ready to sign anymore, not unless on the day of our divorce you stand outside City Hall in front of everyone and publicly apologize for all the things that have happened to me." I smirked as I looked at Joanne, my chest heaving, and said, "Now I really feel alive." He lost his temper and slammed down the phone. I stared at the screen as the call disconnected, and my smile only grew wider. That's okay, he'd come crawling back soon enough because my plan had already been set in motion quietly and carefully, and not a single one of the damages you've caused me over the years. You must also clear my name and tell the truth about all those lies your so-called true love spread about me online. If you can't do that, then forget it and don't even bring up divorce again. 2 days later, he called again, and this time, his voice was desperate and urgent. He agreed to everything, and I knew it was time to settle the score. Using the information Joanne had gathered for me, I located Denise's phone number and sent her a brief message tomorrow at 3 p.m. Harold arrived on time the following morning, standing outside City Hall as I requested, and he did exactly what I asked of him in front of an increasing number of onlookers. He apologized, stood there looking gray and humbled, and publicly confessed to the years of pain he had caused me, to every act of betrayal, and, most importantly, he made it clear that Denise's online smear campaign against people gathered around me, curious and shocked. Phones came out, videos were taken, and some clips were already going viral within minutes, but Harold didn't care. He seemed to be in a trance, desperate to get this over with, desperate to wipe the slate clean. He didn't even bat an eye at the sight of cameras, and he didn't care that his pride was being stripped away one sentence at a time. After his performance was over, we entered the building together, Two people who had once built a life together, now calmly, no drama, no tears. Simply the final signature on a story that had been waiting for a long time to come to an end. At precisely 3 p.m. City Hall's front steps were turned into a stage, and a woman wearing a form-fitting red dress stood poised close to the door. Her makeup flawless. Denise stood across from her, her posture exuding confidence like a queen waiting for her coronation. She was visibly nervous and uneasy, fidgeting with her purse. Harold and I arrived on time, but he didn't even look at Denise. Instead, he walked directly toward the woman in red and took her hand in his with practiced ease and cold certainty. Denise's face turned white, and then, as if something had suddenly struck her, she lunged at him, grabbing his arm in desperation. After completing the paperwork, the clerk informed us that we would need to return in a week to pick up our official divorce certificate. As we stepped outside, Denise was still on the ground, sobbing and clutching her phone, half screaming into it, and completely unraveling in public. Harold yanked his arm away with a flick of contempt and walked forward with the red-dressed woman, not even bothering to look back. Harold didn't even blink, and the woman next to him gave Denise a cool look. Then walked away with his heels clicking confidently across the pavement. I walked over to Denise and stopped just in front of her. I gave her a light, almost playful smile because I had heard that you two were in love. Her expression instantly twisted, and she screamed and lunged at me once more in a fit of rage, but I was prepared, so I sidestepped smoothly and let her stumble past me without even brushing my coat. "Damn, did you see that move? This L's got some real fire," a bystander yelled. Since the funeral service company had called so many times before, I barely had time to sit down before they called again. "Hello, ma'am," said the familiar voice on the other end, half amused, half defeated. "It's safe to say you really don't need our services after all." I laughed and hung up, giving them a wave and thanking them. I then walked away gracefully, unbothered, and gloriously free back home. I went back to the hospital to check in because I couldn't continue to live like I was dying forever, could I? The following day, I had a complete medical examination, and the results stopped me cold. The doctor sat across from me, flipping through the report with raised eyebrows. His voice was filled with surprise and something like, "Ah, madam." He said, slowly, "Your cancer cells are completely gone, no signs of metastasis, nothing." I stared at him in shock, asking, "What do you mean?" "I healed, like, completely." He nodded, "Yes, you're in remission." He handed me my chart and added that a colleague of mine is creating a medical podcast and video series, and he would love to share your story. "I'm fully recovered, but this type of illness doesn't just go away, does it?" The doctor smiled and shrugged as he said, "It's rare, but it happens. Some patients experience what we call spontaneous remission. You're not the first, you can look it up. Miracles, you have the potential to inspire many people. Would you be open to an interview?" Tears came to my eyes, not from sadness but from a deeper sense of relief and gratitude. I nodded, grinning broadly, and I would be honored if my story gave even one person hope. A week later, Harold and I formally picked up our divorce certificate, and from that point on, there was no longer any emotional or legal connection between us. That she came to see me privately that afternoon after she had appeared at City Hall with Harold. I gave her the last payment we had agreed upon in advance, and she accepted it with a big smile. She said, "Thank you, ma'am. If any of your friends ever need a similar acting service, feel free to refer them. We offer a discount for returning clients." Later, I learned that Harold had gone into full-blown panic trying to find her, posting missing person flyers all over the town, but of course he was unable to locate her, and a year had gone by. And I became somewhat of a local celebrity, the hip-hop grandma who survived cancer. It didn't take long for me to gain a small online following, and people began calling me Cool Margaret. Eventually, the name stuck, and I partnered with someone to launch a small business. My partner treated me with genuine respect, ran day-to-day operations, checked on my health, and looked after me like family. Everything was going well, life was bright and vibrant, and there were plenty of opportunities. Until one day, someone from the past knocked on Melissa. Hadn't spoken to me in a long time, and when she sat down opposite me, she looked like a shadow of the woman I used to know. Instead of the polished, always smiling daughter-in-law, she was a worn-out, exhausted woman with hollow eyes and a heavy heart. She sat quietly for a while before saying, "Margaret, I want to talk," but I said nothing, just watched her, and she whispered, wringing her fingers nervously. I was naive and selfish. I believed as long as I thought I was a victim too, but now I see that I was part of the harm, part of what hurt you. I'm living the life you once had, carrying everything alone, Brian. He's drinking a lot, shutting down, and avoiding everything. And he's becoming his father, and I'm the one left holding the pieces. Her eyes were filled with. I was comfortable, nothing else mattered, and I never realized just how much you'd been carrying all these years, so I said nothing. I finally realized that leaving wasn't selfish, it was brave. I sat there silently for a while before speaking, and Melissa nodded. Yes, I do, I said, standing up and approaching her, giving her a tissue. You're finally the Melissa I always hoped to meet, I said gently, and we exchanged a smile. There was no retaliation. No resentment, no grudge, just peace and a small sense of closure. After more than a month, Brian came to visit me. He began by making an awkward attempt to inquire about my previous illness and showing some hesitant concern before gradually turning the conversation to his own life, which is how I found out he was divorced. He sat across from me, clearly uncomfortable, fidgeting with his hands like a child who doesn't know where he fits in. Mom. I know there were many misunderstandings between us. He said in a low voice, I'm sorry. I gave him a gentle smile because, when I was younger, I believed that showing compassion was a good deed. He lowered his head and sighed, and I said, Brian, you're not a bad person, you've just never really grown up. You're not your father, sweetheart, and you never have to be, but now you need to step up, you have responsibilities, your son and your family need you. I've realized that true kindness is loving yourself and not making others pay for your cowardice. I hope someday you'll truly understand my decision. A little hazy, I got up, went over, and hugged him, and at that very moment, life returned to its normal rhythm after I forgave him, but this time my heart is more stable than before. I still go to daily dance lessons where they practice new routines and perform for the younger members of our club. Playfully refer to them as the expanded version of my youth that the firm is operating, and name me their spirit coach. Smoothly, I've taken a step back from daily operations and given the younger staff more responsibilities. I've decided to devote more time to myself, therefore, I've taken up photography and begun learning French. I'm organizing a journey to Europe the following year to see the Louvre in Paris, take the picturesque trains via the Swiss Alps, and dance unrestrictedly. I've also joined a senior community outreach group in Spain, where I teach and volunteer in nursing homes. Elderly people who had long felt forgotten might express themselves through simple rhythm exercises and watch their eyes light up. I frequently find myself feeling indescribable as I watch them rediscover their existence in the world with every step. As I stand in front of the mirror, I can see the lines that time has engraved on my face, yet I no longer perceive any imperfections. See tails, I see strength, and each wrinkle serves as a reminder of despite everything I've endured and overcome, I frequently claim that I've spent most of my life attempting to win people over, and now in the I'm finally learning to love myself. With the time I have left because living is the solution to life, not simply enduring it. I used to believe that aging meant fading away, giving up, stepping back, and becoming silent, but now I realize that even in there are still countless paths worth exploring, tales worth writing, dances worth doing, and life's second act. I was previously hurt by relatives, but I've learned to forgive them. I was shaken by fate, but I managed to free myself. I once deliberately and arbitrarily thought my life was coming to an end, but in reality, that was only the start. There are still a lot of days left before I can truly live there, dance, explore, and live totally and fiercely. The world will continue to applaud me as long as I'm still clapping for myself, since this time I've really stepped into I am Margaret. My own light. I am not anyone's shadow or property. I am just I love the woman I've become, and I'm unapologetic.